you start to look at life and say, this is very unclear. And in those moments, you almost lose yourself. So I'm going to be speaking to you about the dots and dashes. Dots, when you connect, gives you purpose. And dashes, when you understand your life. You get to understand your own identity. So, one of the most important persons who managed to understand what is dots and dashes was the inventor, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was an outstanding man. He could connect the dots. At one point in time, he went into a place which was called Parks. Now, Parks is a place somewhere in Palo Alto Research Center. 1979, when he went out there, Parks was a place which belonged to Xerox. What did Xerox want to do? Xerox had forgotten that their entire copiers, the patent for that was exhausted. So they wanted a better copier. But what did they get when these inventors got together? They got three things. They got something called a GUI, which is user interface, guest user interface. They also got a mouse, and they found that they could use the Ethernet, which is to connect one computer to the other. And when they presented it before the management, they said, hey, listen, but this is not a copier. Along came Steve Jobs. He looked at this and he says, it's very difficult to give a command to a computer to start to work, because those commands are very complicated. So he liked this user interface, and he said the mouse can be useful, and I'm going to make a computer. And that's what he did in 1983. Mac was born. Remember, he was also into calligraphy. So he made sure that he connected the dots, and then you had a computer. More. Some stage, he felt that you should have music on a device. So he called the iPods in place. And then, who would ever think that you can stick a camera into a mobile? He did that. Then he put music on top of that. Today, you also have the Apple TV on it. Steve was a person who was able to connect the dots. So, if you look at this gentleman, an amazing man. Why? Because he was that person who was able to connect the dots of very distinct and disparate items. For instance, you thought space was absolute, time was absolute, electromagnetism was absolute. But here comes Einstein, who says all these are connected. Space and time, he called it space-time. He even had a theory of relativity, where he said space and time are connected with respect to a person who is observing that, and this person could be in motion. And you will think that all this is mumbo jumbo, but every time you're on to your Google map and you're along the road wondering where your destination is, remember you're traveling almost in space. There is a time attached to it. GPS was born because you had somebody connect the dots or anything to do with Dr. Einstein. This one is ubiquitous. You can't do without an Aadhaar card. There was a time when people could not get into bank accounts because in disparate villages, people found it impossible to even say, this is my identity. Next, you could not get government aid. Where is the government going to find out where you live and make sure that the aid comes to you? 3, you can't open bank accounts. Anything that you do, you need an identity. So which is what Nandan Nilekani did. He connected the dots. He felt every person has an identity. And there are 2 things that you need. All you need is your fingerprint, which is unique to you, and your eyes, your iris. And you're able to put all of these together That's what Nandan Nilekani did. And if I go to the next one, you will find that there is something very unique about Twitter. So here was a person, his only job was to make sure that he connected with people on short messaging texts of emergency teams and couriers. That was his job. And he was also interested in the social media, so he put two and two together, connected the dots, and Twitter was born. Jack Dorsey was able to connect the dots. And if you go to the next one, is about Edward Lorenz. And if you see this butterfly out here, you'll start to think, what does butterfly got to do with Lorenz, who was a meteorologist. And he was able to predict the future. But there was one thing that he observed. He observed that any time he made a correction or rounded off numbers, he found that that has a completely dramatic effect on the prediction of the weather. For instance, 0.50627, if it were shortened to 0.506, you had a problem on your hands. So he connected the dots that it's not the rounding off that one should be doing, because you could change everything. So he coined the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is anything that flutters as a butterfly in one part of the world, and another part of the world, very distant, you could even have a tsunami. So, let me prove something to you. If you look at this picture, this is a picture of a scientist. And if I ask you who this scientist is, you will start to wonder, what is this person about? But if I move to the next one, and if I showed you a couple of things, if I showed you an apple, I showed you an apple tree, and I did tell you that this apple was the one that fell on this gentleman's head, and he got some theory called the theory of gravity, you would know that it is Isaac Newton. Why? Because right in the here and now, you were able to connect the dots. So, if you look at this, in retrospect, I started to look at my life. Have I been able to connect the dots? Perhaps not. 3 years ago, you had war in the Ukraine which started, and I was wondering, why is the price of wheat in India going up? Why? Because Ukraine was a granary of wheat for the world. So if there's something which happens in one part of the world, it starts to affect the other part of the world. They're all connected. I did not know how to connect this dot. Interestingly, another thing happened. 2 years ago, I bought my new car. No longer new. One thing was, I wanted a white-colored car, but I had to settle for a red-colored one. Not that I fancy red too much, but I like white better. And the wait for a white car would be anything up to 8 months. What I didn't realize then was the reason why I had to wait for 8 months was for a very silly reason. Somewhere in Taiwan, there was a factory manufacturing embedded chips, and those embedded chips were not in a position because they had a slowdown. Because of that slowdown, I had to settle for a red-colored car. Everything is connected. There are dots. Our ability to connect the dots is about finding that purpose. If you connect the dots in your life, you would be able to connect with the purpose that you hold. And if we move now to something even more interesting, it's about the dashes. The dashes, as I mentioned, are pauses in your life. The times when things are very, very unclear. And you start to wonder what you're doing with your own life. Dark moments, but you're living in them. And the more that you are in those dots, it's almost like a capsule where you're all tied up right inside. But these dashes are important, because in these dashes, you discover who you are as a person. Let me give you some examples. So the first one that I have is of a lady who I think is very inspiring. Her name is Arunima Sinha. Padma Shri Arunima Sinha. Arunima Sinha, 7 times member of the national team volleyball. 2011, she was in a train heading somewhere where there were thieves and they threw her out of the train, and because of an accident that happened, she lost her leg. The train crushed her left leg. Arunima Sinha was in the hospital for all of 6 months. Difficult times, very difficult times. You're staring at the ceiling, hoping for your leg to get repaired in time because you still had a life to lead. She would never play volleyball again. She would never play volleyball again. But she made a resolve. And that resolve was outstanding because what she said was, I am going to climb Mount Everest. She was the first amputee ever in the world to have climbed Mount Everest. And the best part, she did this in 18 months flat. Not easy. Even if you resolve today that I'm going to climb Mount Everest, 18 months is a bridge too far. And she did this because while she was in the dashes, that was the resolve. She discovered herself in that dash. Take another example. I was not promoted for almost 8 years in my career. I joined an organization. I was not promoted. I felt miserable with myself. It was a day of Lori. And those are the times when everybody is celebrating. I went up to my boss. I was feeling very, very low. I asked my boss, hey, I've not been promoted for 8 years. I'd really like to know why. No, when everybody is celebrating, they're not going to answer questions like this. So he said, can you come to my house tomorrow at 10 o'clock? It was a Sunday. Beautiful, lush lawn. There were 2 white wrought iron chairs. Very nice table out there. And seated was my boss with a pot of coffee in his hand, which he gently poured out to me. And he said, come have coffee. And over that coffee, he handed out a letter to me. And I thought, and I feared the worst, that perhaps this was a letter which was going to fire me. It wasn't. I opened the letter and I was pleasantly surprised to see that I was promoted twice over. Double promotion. And I asked him, I said, seriously, just because I asked you yesterday? And he said, no. Because much of what is happening to you was to do with what you had as bamboos. Bamboo shoots take about more than 5 years before they actually start to shoot. And they would shoot at the rate of almost 18 inches every month. And he said, you will start shooting in your life, Nathan. Just believe in yourself. In all the times when you were absolutely low, you were actually growing. I came away feeling very, very inspired because in the dashes, what I thought was rejection was not rejection, was redirection and rejuvenation. The next slide is a little bit about me. I don't know about you, but I wanted to be an engineer. I could not be an engineer. My results had come late, and my father could not afford me as an engineer growing up in another state. It would be too expensive for him. Ultimately, I did a program in mathematics. Mathematics, not a subject that I really loved. I didn't like mathematics. But did I do well in mathematics? I did well in mathematics. Next, I used to feel miserable. What is a person studying mathematics going to do in his life? I had no answer. And I felt that I was in the dashes. Then I wanted to do my MBA. First, forget engineering, forget IIT, let me get to IIM. I could not secure admissions to IIM Ahmedabad. That was my dream. Fortunately for me, I studied a little extra hard and I got through XLRI. Did I do well? Yes, I did well. And then I started to look at my life, and all of these years, 3 decades later, if I look back in retrospect, those dashes of the times when I did not get what I want was the one that defined me as a person. Because I learned in the dashes that if you don't get what you like what you get. And you make a meal of that. You do well with that. So in conclusion, what I'd say is, we started with the Morse code. I end with the Morse code. Life is a lot about dots and dashes. In connecting the dots, you find your purpose. And living in the dashes is not easy. Right now, many of you could be, or a few of you could be in those dashes, wondering what we are doing with our own lives. Sometimes seems rather purposeful, but recognize that your story is being written in invisible ink, known only to you. There are no grand announcements. Some dashes are a little bit about rejection letters, emails that are not responded to, messages that are kind of lost. In all of this, we learn about ourselves. The dots are important. The dashes even more so, because the dashes help you find a connect with all the dots of your life, and all you need is being curious, understanding patterns. More importantly, in the dashes, you understand yourself. In conclusion, I'll say, there will be a time in your life when your yellow river will turn clear and the wheels of fortune will turn in your favor. I repeat. There will be a time in your life when the yellow river will turn clear and the wheels of fortune will turn in your favor. All because you've connected the dots, you lit the dashes, and you did well. Thank you very much.